Hello, dear comrades. We continue our course of lectures on the concept of public safety. And in the previous session, we got acquainted with the global evolutionary process. Basically, as you probably noticed, there was nothing new there. In general, we refreshed our memory on what we were once taught in school, what genetics, mutations, and so on are. This will help us understand the topic we are starting now. We will now consider the global historical process based on the knowledge we refreshed in the last session. There are two approaches to the emergence of new biological species. It is known that many species of living organisms have disappeared from the biosphere. Dinosaurs, pterodactyls, this is generally known to everyone. But not a single case of the emergence of a new biological species has been recorded. Why? Based on this, man has imagined himself as the crown of nature. And many scientists assert that man is the crown of nature, based on its novelty in the knowledge we possess. But as is known, novelty is not only perfection. This is especially known in technology. But it is also a characteristic of all experimental samples. And if the crown begins to press on the head of the crowned one, then he may throw off such a crown. Therefore, the question of the emergence of new species is very important, and we need to understand this. There are two possible variants of emergence. The first variant is a cascade of mutations. It is known that once a mutation arises, it can spread throughout the entire population, part of the population, or disappear from the population. From this, it is clear that a new species can arise from an old one as a result of a cascade of mutations. But then, regarding humans, the question of intermediate links arises. And since this process was lengthy, these intermediate links should have been known to science. And at the same time, the known and fossilized humans should have existed, but they do not. Such a process also allows for the degradation of a species, and there are in general such scientific theories, in quotes, that assert that human degradation is occurring. But the global evolutionary process has a unidirectional nature. Remember the caduceus, with two snakes that cannot crawl backward, and this nature moves towards complexity. In the modern biosphere, only stable species exist, and we do not observe an abundance of intermediate forms. The second option, the genetic catastrophe that we discussed in the last session. At one time, a part of the proto-human species, generations or several capable of reproduction generations, experienced a genetic catastrophe. That is, the disappearance of the genetically stable core, and the females began to give birth only to, well, monsters in quotes. But these monsters already belonged to the species of Homo sapiens, and were genetically closed in relation to the individuals that produced them. Recall the terminology from the last session. What is genetic closure? That is, during mating, either infertile or unstable and disappear. This aligns with the position we have just stated. It corresponds to the unidirectionality of the global evolutionary process towards complexity. The known composition of the biosphere and fossil remains of past biospheres indicates that the path of evolution is not a smooth, gradual ascent. Now recall the first lecture. Remember the stepwise transparent funnel with steps, where the little rope fits. Here, and this is a multi-step ladder. On each step, there is a diversity of species. Each step forms the basis for the next. This variant removes the question of intermediate links and raises the question of the cause of genetic changes. Let's ponder the causes and factors of genotype changes. In the broadest sense, we can assume two reasons. The first is natural, that is, a physical natural cause. And the second is non-natural, that is, divine. Let's consider possible options. Well, here is option A, a virus. A virus can introduce new information into the genotype, selectively affecting germ cells. Well, in particular, like HIV/AIDS, this acquired immunodeficiency syndrome selectively affects red blood cells. This will introduce changes in the chromosomes such that after conception, an organism belonging to a new species will result. Here, in this picture, is an illustration of what we said. There is a man, a woman, and some virus. So it affected them, meaning the red blood cells, and as a result, they ended up with a crocodile gene, that is, a distortion of the chromosomal apparatus. And the other reason is radiation. Let's recall our first lecture on the trinity of matter, information, and the world, about how all processes in the universe have a vibrational nature, and the vibrations are very diverse. The chromosomal apparatus is an oscillatory system. Here is the X chromosome and the Y chromosome. And it is an oscillatory system that is capable of emitting oscillations and receiving oscillations. And if there is some source of oscillations that affects this chromosomal apparatus, the XY chromosome, and this source of oscillations, the oscillations will be such that they will carry. If it carries some code, let's assume, which has a certain meaning, then such a code and such oscillations with that code can cause a restructuring of the chromosomal apparatus of the cells. Well, illustrations from life, how can this look? Many people can't stand, you know, when metal scrapes against glass, and I, in particular, can't handle it when it squeaks. Like when a knife cuts across a plate, it makes that sound. It really distorts. It's the same here. If there is some oscillation that distorts the XY chromosome, then the chromosomal apparatus will change. It will be screened. Such radiation should, generally speaking, qualitatively differ from the usual mutagenic background, that is, from familiar oscillations. So, here. This option is the most acceptable, and perhaps there are other factors, not just what we have considered, A and B, which we do not know yet. So, we have focused on A and B. Let's reason. Let's think about reasoning by analogy. Well, if there is a factor which can distort the chromosomal apparatus which causes it to act. Moreover, it triggers every time on time. That is, when a certain stage of biosphere development is completed. And from the knowledge that we possess, they tell us that oxygen-breathing species appeared no earlier than the plant world created the atmosphere and the ozone layer. Predators appeared no earlier than herbivores, and so on. That is, the process of biosphere development is analogous to the process of launching a multi-stage space rocket. And here is depicted the rocket, in particular the Proton, which I once served at the Cosmodrome. So, it has several stages, and this rocket, the Proton, puts satellites into geostationary orbit, in particular communication satellite. And here is an illustration of the rocket. It has the first stage, the second stage, the third stage, and the upper stage, which is activated over Africa and puts the satellite into orbit, in connection with the geostationary orbit, which rotates in the plane of the equator, and its speed is related to the rotation speed of the Earth. So it kind of hangs in one point. Therefore, for an observer on Earth, the satellite is stationary. So how is it launched? First, the first stage operates, then it falls, then the second stage also falls to Earth, then the third, and then the upper stage launches the satellite into orbit. But let's consider this rocket. This rocket flies according to a program developed by human intelligence. That is, scientists and engineers developed all of this and so on. And what intelligence, whose intelligence has been guiding the evolution of the biosphere for hundreds of years. And here in the lower picture, in the table, there is some kind of analogy, a comparison with the flight of the rocket. Look, what is here? Here is a timeline, and here are the types that are known, or rather, the so-called eras and periods in development. The biosphere on planet Earth and the animal world, namely the Archean, Proterozoic, the Permian period, and everything else indicated here, we won't list them. And in each period there was an emergence. First, you can look at the time parameters in this scale. So, invertebrates appeared first, then plants, insects, land animals, fish, and so on. And if you keep rising, humans appear like this. It's like one step flies, bang, a new species appears in the animal world. Then, bang, a new stage is activated, it flies. It's like an analogy to that same rocket flight. So, atheists, so to speak, who say there is no God, they say, well, it just happened by chance. Well, it happened that way, so of course one can talk about it. So, let's just find out. And since all of this is by chance, what is the probability of these random occurrences in the overall evolutionary process of the biosphere and the development of the animal world on planet Earth? That is, it turns out that there is some intelligence that governs all of this process. Therefore, these conclusions of reasoning, of course, are analogies. But analogies serve as a basis for making appropriate conclusions. And it turns out that even from such simple reasoning, and we will further complicate this, it turns out that some higher intelligence exists, and this intelligence, reigning in nature, is immeasurably more powerful than the human one, and its capabilities are immeasurably greater than those of a person and the collective intelligence of humanity as a whole. And the concept of God, the creator, the sustainer in the lives of people, this is not a work of artistic creativity or their invention. And in general, think about where such a, let's say, mindless person at the very beginning who, they knew nothing, what kind of flight of imagination they must have had to invent for themselves, not understanding anything about the existence of some intelligence, God, and so on. That is a transcendent reality. Where did this come from? Also, food for thought. Where do discoveries, knowledge, and laws come from? So again, remember the definition, particularly in the Quran, what I quoted to you, the definition of God, Allah, there is no deity except Him, the ever-living. That is, He is alive, existing, thinking. Neither drowsiness nor sleep overtakes Him. To Him belongs all that is in the heavens and on the earth. No one can stand before Him except by His permission. That is, who will enter into dialogue with Him. He knows all that was before them and will be after them. That is, all knowledge exists there in the universe, and they, that is, humans, comprehend nothing from what He knows except when He wishes it. That is, knowledge is given to people from above, and all discoveries, what is called inspiration. Here is a typical example everyone surely knows. Newton, Ohm's law, the apple fell. It inspired him. Therefore, in the universe there exists, as I say, the law of universal gravitation, which also existed before Newton. And Newton only derived what exists in the real world, bringing it to a level of awareness and formulating it. The same applies to all other knowledge. From here, if we can extend this thought, we can talk about intellectual property. So what is it? Where does all this come from? Does a person invent it themselves, or does it all belong to everyone? And a person is just a conduit of certain knowledge into society. And what is the conclusion from this? Everything we have talked about reflects in society the true existence of God. That is, the existence of that transcendent reality that people call God, And God gives proof of his existence to each person himself. How is this given? Through the response to the appeal to him. And I've already talked about how my friend Georgy Alexeyevich Zora was given such revelations. That is, try, and God speaks to each person through the language of life circumstances. That is, if you pay attention to the events happening around you, you will see the hints that are given by that transcendent reality. These hints can manifest in the most profound ways when God gives guidance. Well, there are people who, as we considered when discussing the Trinity of matter and the information of the world, the acquisitions of the Holy Spirit, when people trying to enter into a dialogue with God establish direct contact and they receive these revelations, but such people are called prophets, and there have been very few of them. In the lives of well-known individuals, there are psychics who receive revelations, but considering the upcoming lecture on Gregor, what it is, one can understand from whom they receive these revelations. That is, from God or from some biofield structure with which they have established a connection. This is still a big question. That is, God gives evidence to each person himself and speaks to them in the language of life circumstances. Well, if we say it in a primitive way, this is how it looks. If a person is going the wrong way, then let's say they will stumble, then something will break, and eventually they might even break a leg or something else. And if he doesn't notice this, he keeps going, and everything starts to unravel for him, and nothing works out. If a person understands these hints, these clues from God, then he corrects his actions. Further, what I have just told you. It will be well understood when considering the main provisions of the sufficiently general theory of control, which we will soon begin after reviewing the global historical process. Therefore, God's answer to a person's request lies in the fact that the statistics of different cases occurring with a person change. Well, this is what I tried to explain to you with primitive examples. So, the overall conclusion of our reflections of what we have already considered together. So, there is the biosphere of planet Earth, and there is a matrix of its possible states. That is, the biosphere has changed. A global evolutionary process was underway. Remember, the plant world and the animal world appeared there. So this matrix is conditionally represented as a funnel, although in reality it has stepped edges. Just understand that this is a graphic conditional representation of the development of the biosphere. Here, this matrix, this green part, is a fragment of the universal matrix of possible states. That is, this matrix is inscribed within the orange universal world. That is, the universe is a multidimensional probabilistic matrix of possible states of matter. And all the rhythms of the cosmos affect the biosphere of the planet. And primarily, the solar system has a huge influence, although other galaxies also impact this solar system itself. That is, in general, the universal world exerts its influence on this matrix. And there is a continuous process of information reflection into the biosphere from the universe. So these arrows, what are they? The transmission of information, mainly a vibrational process, light vibrations, electromagnetic wave vibrations, and so on. And conversely, there is reverse information flowing from the biosphere with small arrows. Thus, the biosphere of Earth exerts informational influence on the entire universe. This process is indicated here. So, there is the universe. It expands its influence on the biosphere of planet Earth and the Earth. Also vibrates, radiating. And the vibration also exerts its influence on the processes occurring in the universe. That is, if we speak from the perspective of a sufficiently general theory of control, which we will consider, it turns out that the universe is a subject of control. That is, the one who controls is the object of control. Well, let's assume this is the driver and this is the car or horse. And here the driver controls the object. The object realizes the intention of the one who controls, and the subject evaluates the quality of the subject based on feedback of its control. that is, what is happening correctly, how the parameters change, the gauges in the car, whether the fuel has run out, and so on. This gives an understanding of how control is exercised. In this scheme, control and self-control are mutually embedded processes and concepts. That is, it can be said that this is also a process of influence. This is also control. Since there is information, it means it is in a state, and this shows some influence here. Therefore, we introduce the concept of the hierarchically highest control from God in relation to the biosphere, which flows through the encompassing matrix of possible states. This is what is depicted in orange. The hierarchically highest encompassing control is carried out through informational influence on the processes in the biosphere of planet Earth, and self-control flows within the limits of this influence. That is, there are some processes that occur within the biosphere itself, but they occur within the framework of what is commonly referred to as divine allowance. That is, you cannot go beyond divine allowance, you cannot go against God, as they say. Here, in the opti-universal measure, this brings into action the factor that causes the birth of a new species in the biosphere. This is what we have come to. What it is with the precision of Da Vinci, that is, this factor, well, we do not know yet. But in the most general form, here is a description of how this influence occurs. Therefore, the conclusion is about God, because it is such a... Everyone is trying to draw attention to this issue now. Scientists are somehow dodging it, and party officials are avoiding the question about God. How? What? They say, well, there is the church, there are candles. They stand as candlesticks in churches and believe that they are with God. In fact, all of this is from the evil one. No one speaks directly about it, although many scientists already now, including scientists, have come to understand the existence of that transcendent reality that people call God. And they again cunningly begin to speak of cosmic intelligence, the informational field of the universe, just to avoid saying what people have long, they called it God. So in the concept of public safety, we say that transcendent reality, the informational field of the universe, cosmic intelligence, and so on, we say God. Therefore, we say that some higher intelligence, God, exists. And remember the lecture. The universal matrix of possible states possesses a quality that many religions attribute to God. God is everywhere, and everything exists within him. The measure also exists everywhere, and everything exists within the measure. Remember the question that the Pharaoh asked the priests, name the word that describes all percentages in the universe. And the experts did not say, but the priests said, this word is measure. Therefore, all matter exists within the measure in its various states, and matter is inseparably connected to what is happening with information. This thesis about the existence of measure as the original category of the building block that exists connects science and religion. Therefore, the concept of public safety in its philosophical foundation, what we discussed in the first lecture, the trinity of matter and information of the world, is a serious thesis about resolving the contradictions currently existing in our society between science and religion. And what lies behind this, you can imagine, it is the resolution of contradictions between various religious denominations. It is wars and so on. In other words, this is a very serious matter. A remark here is the red frames. Pantheism, that is, those who call God is nature. Pantheism identifies measure, that is, divine predestination, with the Almighty. Religions that deny pantheism, in principle, perceive measure as the most general means of governing the universe by God. And it is through this measure that the energy information flow from God, that is, the Holy God, flows. Well, here's what I want to say. If, for the first perception, we are all originally, I understand, from their materialists, that is, we were taught this in schools. These are the kids. When I taught students at universities, you give these lectures, or to school children, and you tell them they perceive it as it is. That is, you tell them the world consists of three. The parts of matter, information of the world, they look at you, write it down. For them it is a revelation, but we all went through something completely different. Therefore, when such information is loaded, a person looks and thinks, what is this? That is, I was taught differently, and this guy is saying something, so how is it possible if I was taught this way? The information is not loaded into emptiness, it goes into the mind, and there is something in the person. Therefore, from this point of view, even it is precisely those who have a lot in their heads that find it much harder to perceive this. But why did I create this verbal opus? So if it's difficult, then at least at the first stage of acquaintance with the concept, perceive it as pantheism. That is, God is nature itself, and all the laws that exist in the universe are indeed the laws of nature. They are the God that governs us. That is, these laws. And we do not know all these laws. We are only discovering them. But it is important to understand that even if we recognize God in the form of nature, it turns out that these laws are a pressure factor in relation to us. And to disregard these laws is what the proverb says. You cannot go against God. So, what is the conclusion from this about the meaning of human life?